Do you see how accurately we got that? It's exactly 6.
I was pretty much right on.
I'm pretty much
Great
the greatest
job.
thing I've done all week. Hello, my name is Steve Shiger.
And I'm Mike Foster.
And welcome once again to... We're not looking good. We have 0 viewers so far, Michael. We'll just assume it's a Twitch glitch. Glitch. Oh.
Yeah, I'm just here to chat with you. It's all good.
Yeah, it's fine. Lots of people will watch it after the fact. What are they watching? This show is all things Kubernetes. I think I called it cyber geekery. Security, of course. And what else?
Just general WTF topics. What's going on in the world? With security focused, of course. We're changing up our format a little bit. We're just going to go live to Twitch, and then we're going to cut all the content, add it to YouTube. We also have meetups here on this Twitch channel that get posted to YouTube as well. And we're going to try to get other content just from other channels, security talks that we think you might be interested in, general stuff from the Kubernetes security community. So check out YouTube for more information as well as we grow this channel. And thanks for joining again.
Yeah,
Steve,
please do. How do you favorite us in Twitch? How do you do that? Follow us on Twitch. If you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, give us the thumbs up, ring the bell, do all the nice things, and subscribe. Then you don't have to watch us live. We won't be hurt that there's 0 followers because we'll get such a following after the fact, and that's totally fine. I was going to plug the podcast thing at the very end, but I'm going to do it now because you just said we're adding things to YouTube. So give me 2 seconds. This is the shameless plug section of the show. This is my audio podcast. It's on Spotify. It's on all good podcast sources. But Michael just suggested that I wrap it up in a pretty graphic so that you can go listen on YouTube, which not a bad idea. So that's going to go on the YouTube channel as well.
Steve, you bring on a bunch of guests too. Like I really like the DevSecOps talk that you had recently. So yeah, if you get a chance and you're not annoyed by Steve and I by the end of this thing, you can check him out and get some extra content. You just cut me in.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. No, I'm not going to cut you up. You're plugging me. I didn't realize you were going to do that.
Yeah, well, now we can get into the actual good stuff, though. Well,
all right.
A little bit of a repeat, too. I just want to give you a PSP update. Still in the same talk. So just like last week when I talked about Tim Allclair's sort of document, there was a big discussion about all the pathways forward. And just to give you a little bit of insight as to why it's so hard to make security decisions, there's a constant back and forth between what to enforce, what not to enforce. You know, so-and-so is doing Kubernetes this way, so-and-so is doing it a different way. Realistically, neither are maybe best practices in Kubernetes, but you need to accommodate the community because you don't want people leaving your product or, say, moving, right? So with security, and especially Kubernetes, it's constantly finding this balance of how much can we secure while also giving flexibility for people to run Kubernetes how they want, right? It's a tough balance. So, you know, having the default security policies that kind of basically only yell at you and say, hey, you're running as root, that seems to be kind of that lowest level that you can come in at. It's just going to be interesting to see the different enforcement mechanisms and honestly how the Kubernetes community supports it. So it's still in the works.
What if people want to be? What if people want to be involved in that decision-making process? Like, how do people get involved in those kind of things?
Yeah, so the CNCF is pretty much wide open. How I got involved is I joined the Slack channel, and there's also the CNCF calendar. So I added the whole calendar basically to my calendar, and I can see all the different SIGs that are up there. There is actually a new SIG. So there's a SIG supply chain, I don't think it's supply chain security. I think it's just SIG supply chain, where they're looking at all the different things in the CNCF ecosystem for securing your supply chain. That's a new one if you want to go check it out. CNCF SIG security, and then there's CNCF like SIG Kubernetes security. So there's a couple different aspects to that. Again, join them. All the information is going to be in those meeting invites in the calendar if you're looking to get started.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Michael. That was really good.
Sweet.
Shall we move to our first, this is more news, I suppose, or interesting articles that we found throughout the week. We'll start there.
Sure.
Boom, boom, boom. And this was one of my finds on a site that I'd never heard of. Like, I don't know, Bishop, is that a person? I don't know who this is. However, I did like the article. You can see January 19th. Bad pods. But essentially, it was a very good way of illustrating when you're talking about security to do with pods, the ramifications of misconfiguration. And it's got some quite interesting, everything allowed, all the different doors that are open. What's the worst that can happen? Multiple paths to full cluster compromise. And it starts to explain how. I'm not going to go into all of them. That would take the whole show. But it starts to reduce the privilege, and yet you still end up in full cluster compromise in many situations. But it does explain how. So when we talk about best practices, or if you're being told about best practices, it's actually a really good article to go to actually get the why do I have to do this? How can somebody abuse this misconfiguration and do it in kind of a light and entertaining way? So I thought it was actually a really good article.
Yeah, I really like the door analogy. Right. Because, and this was it you that was saying that you wish they had more context, like the CVEs, right? It's like, especially with Kubernetes and security, just having a single, or let's say you're running with like privilege, is not necessarily bad, especially if everything else is locked down too, right? It's just making sure that you understand, okay, well, you have a couple things that are open. Now you have multiple sort of vectors, right? So that you need to make sure that you're on top of. So I kind of like that door analogy of like, hey, you got 3 doors open. Here's all the bad things that can happen versus here's just one you need to worry about, right?
Exactly. It's the exact opposite of defense in depth. If you've got all the doors open, it's attack vectors in depth.
There you go.
Very good. Hey, based on that, I might rearrange the order a little bit as we move on, because you just mentioned CVEs in context, and there was a CVE that we can talk about. So let me shuffle that over without very quickly. The CVE 2021. I like how you don't have to get too far into the year before you get a real whopper with the year on it. The heap-based buffer overflow in Sudo. You found this. Did you want to introduce it?
So this is a CVE that has been around since 2011. It was introduced in Git, so they went all the way back and found it. From what I gather, basically, you can run as a user. So they ran, and actually in this, I'll put this blog in the chat for Sam there if he wants to look at it. If they want to look at it, basically you run a script. If you run enough commands in the command line, you run out of memory and you get returned as a root user. So again, this has been here for 10 years. And we're just finding out about this now. So it's an interesting one. I think Falco wrote a blog about it too, about basically, making a change. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is patched in the next 2 weeks. It was basically high on the escalation for the open source team. So
there's a nice little repro video there too, if you're really keen, like on the article, and you're thinking, what are they talking about? It's short, it's 2 minutes. You can even put it in fast motion if you're impatient like me. And if you're really geeky, you can get into the actual reason why it doesn't work. Essentially, it's a way of overloading the input parameters to a point where, buffer overflow, right? One of the biggest problems, particularly in C language coding, is that you have to allocate memory. It's not a managed language. So if you just chuck more than you've allocated into it, more than they ever anticipated, then they might not actually check how much you pass in, and you get all sorts of issues. Actually, Heartbleed, the famous one with the logo of the heart that bleeds way back, was similar. It was a case of asking for more than you gave in Heartbleed. So if said, repeat back to, I don't remember Heartbleed, but it was a heartbeat that you said, hello, and it was going to say hello back to you just to say it was alive. But you said, hello, by the way, hello has 2,000 characters in it. Did you know that? Yeah, great. And it would send you back 2,000 characters and the word hello. So it's one of those things where you're messing with memory. Old-fashioned, but still pretty effective. So if you've got something like this, someone gets access to an environment and you had all your doors open, and they could sudo and get past it and get root access into your image, whoops, bad.
Oh yeah. I just can't believe it took so long to get caught.
Well, then people will go, well, how threatening is it really? It probably actually was really threatening, and it was happy in its dormant state, but now the world knows about it. So now anybody who gets access to anything, there's going to be a bot that tries this.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's going to be the first thing the hackers do now.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, you sound Canadian when you do that, eh?
Oh yeah. Yeah, sorry, did it leak out? It's Friday. I'm losing my my Canadian accent suppression.
Software's turning off. So just to keep this in the order of, until we get to the WTF category, I quickly reordered the interesting things in advance of the WTFs. And I moved the Splunk top 50 security threats PDF to now. And this is where I apologize to Splunk. Wonderful company. But I entered my give up your soul details to get access to this. And then when I saw that you got direct access to the PDF and it was a very clear, repeatable path, I decided to tell the world about it because, and particularly it'd be a real shame if I ended up in our chat.
That's a good point.
But it's actually a great PDF. A lot of these things, like if you look at, unless you're a hyper geek, like and you read the Verizon data breach report, which is pretty intense, I'm always wary of what these are going to be. But if you look inside, it's like, I don't want to say a kid's book for security, but it kind of is. You learn about, here kids, here's account takeover. What you need to know. Get under your desk if the attack happens. It's kind of like,
yeah,
it's a little like, and that's it. Advanced persistent threat. What are these bad guys? Are these the ones with the hoods with the zeros and ones flying around? They are. And
if you were to go to the library, it would be cyber attacks for dummies almost, right? In a book.
It's
one of those.
Yeah. it's really good. And it does have like even all elements of your world. There's cloud access management, crypto mining, the things that we see, but all the traditionals like cross-site scripting, going all the way to IoT. It's cool. So I think, and I don't know, anybody who wants this, that doesn't mean they're going to buy Splunk. So let's free it to the world in our chat. Very good.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's high level. If you need to go more in depth now, you have kind of the information to look, right? So check it out.
Yep. I think it's really awesome, particularly if you're Kubernetes and you just want to, you're DevOps, you're looking to understand how these crazy security people think. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes in. We're nailing it.
Tons of time. We can get into the crazy stuff now.
Should we move to the crazy? All right, let's hit it. Oh, you just reminded me that the other thing we didn't do. So we're going to do the WTF section. It's an appropriate time to introduce the new video that we spend way too much time on. Let's do that. The thoughts expressed on the show belong to the presenters only and not any employer or sponsor. There we go.
That's
just in case.
Our CTA call to action. Something different, but yeah, you know what I mean.
It's our don't blame anybody we're associated with for anything stupid we say section.
Exactly. So in the I saw this actually right after our show last week. Laptops given to British schools came preloaded with a remote access worm. And I thought, I just saw it right after, and I was like, wow, we missed this. But yeah, so there was a batch of 23,000 computers running Windows 10 that were given out. I think so they were manufactured late 2019, and they were basically bulk sold to a school system in the UK, when COVID started. And I mean, in terms of, we talk about like supply chain, but little things like this, where it's just you rush, you never checked it, nobody checked that. Yeah, they came preloaded with Windows 10, but is anybody making sure the setup is correct? So I guarantee you one very thorough parent decided that they wanted to go through and look at what was going on, or why, Jimmy's camera light was on or something like that. So, yeah, I just saw this and I was like, wow, this is just kind of scary. The fact that your kid's given a device and you think, oh, that's great, they're learning. Yeah, look into this stuff, right? Make sure that your devices, especially when they're given to you by somebody else, don't have anything.
If you
Any malware,
yeah, I guess that's the lesson, right? If you order 23,000 computers with Windows 10 from China, could be malware on them.
Yeah. In their defense, they did not. At least they're trying to claim they didn't know where it came from because it was bulk sold by somebody in the UK. My guess is they were under the gun when COVID started, and they're like, we need to figure out a way to supply kids with blah, blah, blah. And they overlooked basically all of the security checks. And if we're being realistic, that's where most security issues happen. You know, you start up a company, maybe you start in like containers, and then you're like, hey, I need to use Kubernetes, and you got to keep functionality up, and you just forget about security altogether, right? So never there. Never there till you need it. Yeah.
You've got to get this is software, not only hardware and software. You've got to get this out the door. We're incentivized by results and features, not by security. And so we just we'll just skip security. It is funny. I said Windows 10 from China as if somehow China is an abnormal place to get computing software and hardware from.
Yeah.
Everything comes from there. So that's irrelevant. But just the idea that many things, it could have been an employee just putting, there could be that malware is all over the plant that actually makes them. Like it's everywhere.
I don't actually think it was the plant. So I think that third party ordered it and then they like bulk set them up and then sell them right to things like school boards, right? So I think it was the intermediary that did something. But yeah, Ask Alice actually said, like, do they even have somebody dedicated to think about security in such establishments? And at least the teachers boards that I know, I don't think so. Or if they do, it's, I mean, these are departments that probably have like a couple people in them, and they're basically using like Windows AD to set up for an entire school board on pretty restrictive permissions. And they're not looking at the devices. They're just like, oh, can I ping it using Windows AD? Yeah, okay, it's there. Great. Like, there's just so many different aspects to it.
So let's move that same question into our world. We go into companies who have got 500 nodes running Kubernetes in production, and we're the first people they've talked to about security. So I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe they don't have somebody looking at security, because there's a lot of people who don't have that.
Yeah, I've seen companies where they're selling a product and they haven't really talked to security until they're selling something, and the other company goes, well, how can I verify that your product is secure, right? That your software is secure, that your SaaS solution is secure? And they go to the developers and they're like, do you have anything? What do we give to them? And the funny thing is the people who are asking don't really know what they're looking for. They're just saying, how do we know it's secure? And they're like, hey, can you give us something? Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times, and it's just scary. It's one of those things where it's like, set a baseline. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, but you should have some sort of baseline in your conversation so that you can expand on that later, right? Should be a topic.
Yeah, we could go into a whole side topic about the reason compliance exists. Yeah, but that would be a rabbit hole.
And Sam actually brought it up, because they said exactly, schools don't get much funding except larger budgets. And I agree, it's somewhat of a budget thing. Hopefully, depending on what happens with COVID, they'll start to actually take these things seriously. And remember our last topic, I think a couple weeks ago, was it was about people in business not thinking the security was a risk with COVID. It was like 50% of people.
Right.
And I guarantee you, it's not just business that thinks that, right? It's people that are part of the school board. So like, yeah, we're giving a laptop to so-and-so at home for their kids to learn. It's like, that still doesn't mean that your devices are secure.
That's true, actually. That's a very good point. So yeah, this is just one example, and the laptops happen to go to kids. And yet in COVID, people are enabling a mass at-home workforce. How are they doing that? Probably by ordering a lot of laptops. And those laptops are going to be connecting to far more dangerous scenarios in the industry than, I guess, a school. Yeah, there you go. Supply chain has been a theme every week.
Oh, yeah.
All right, awesome.
It's hot.
Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Bum, bum, bum. GitLab makes everybody angry. Let's throw it up. Removes its starter tier. I originally thought it was their free tier, and I thought, what? No, they removed the super cheap bronze starter tier that gives you kind of all the things that you want. A little bit too much, you might say. Are you the GitLab guy? You're a GitLab guy, aren't you?
Yeah, so I've always really liked GitLab.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, their starter tier gets you going. You can get a small company off the ground with their starter tier for I think free or relatively close to free. One of the great things about GitLab was the self-hosting aspect too. Some people like it, some people don't, but especially for a lot of companies that want to host privately, right? And when we were originally getting started with Docker like a couple of years ago too, GitLab had its own repository, allowed you to self-host. And you had CI pipelines like 2 years before GitHub did, right? Before GitHub Actions came onto the scene. So at least at one of my previous companies, we were building full pipelines privately, and our images were all stored locally too. So it was kind of an all-in-one solution at the time. I think it was really great. And I think because of that, because of sort of the support that they've done and being a pretty solid product, now they're like, okay, well, we have a good user base. Let's reel back the reins. So I don't know what the play is here. I'd be interested to follow this.
Yeah. They do talk about how they're going to kind of be shifting features that were in the starter tier, like kind of, well, up or down, right? And then they've got this sort of migration plan that's hopefully going to make some people ease towards more pain, or maybe have to just back off and go with the free. But yeah, it was their argument is that they just weren't making any money at the $4. And it's like, I believe that.
It kind of makes sense too, right? Like I think there's a lot of pressure from GitHub since GitHub introduced GitHub Actions. Like a lot of people who are just using basic repositories for simple things, they have all that functionality, that simple stuff now. Now GitHub isn't really getting any money on that either. So basically GitHub has allowed sort of the community to use that for free, and they're cutting off those introductory offers from GitLab, right? But one of the best things about GitLab, I find that they handle projects and repositories a lot better because they have sort of, instead of repositories, they have a project space on top of that, which to me allowed things to scale a lot easier. As soon as you get to a big company and you're using GitHub, then you're going to have a repository for everything, and everybody can create repositories, and you go in and there's like 100 or 200 there, and everybody in their side projects in there, public, private, right? Versus I just go and I say, hey, you're a team, here's a project in GitLab. Thought that was pretty cool. But we should probably talk about this at a different time. And yeah, I could riff for 30 minutes about GitLab versus GitHub. So
we were even thinking of dedicating a show to it, or at least the tool time part of a show. So let's stand down.
Yeah, I'll stop.
We'll get there. Okay, the last WTF section, and it's so stupid that I might even do this again. This thing. I wanted to find I meant to find I think there's a video of Elon Musk. Basically, how dangerous is this? It's a game console built into the front. I mean, yeah, there's one in the back seat, but there's one in the front seat of the new Tesla Model S.
But can it run Cyberpunk?
That's what makes or breaks whether you're going to buy this Tesla.
Well, I mean, Cyberpunk breaks a lot of modern PCs, so I don't think it'll run. But yeah, there is. I don't know. The only thing is, I have seen the fact that like Tesla has this little mat, so you can like sit in the back. So hopefully people aren't using this while they drive. But
they are, but they're sitting in the back.
Yeah. It's so scary.
Well, it's like there's the one in the back. Yeah, that is fine, but all you need is like a kid in the back who's like totally kicking your butt. Was that a racing game? Yeah, so he's already kicking your butt at a racing game, and you're playing. What do you do? Play against him? The racing game while you're actually in a car.
Yeah,
so you're driving two cars at the same time.
I find it really interesting, and I think there's going to be a bunch of new laws in the next 10 years around this stuff, because like you get hit with massive fines for looking at your phone, and then what? as long as you're driving a Tesla and you put a massive screen in the front, it's okay. Like obviously they have a driving mode that kicks in, but again, like you can exit out of that. You don't need to be in the driving dashboard, right? Like you can still use the dashboard. So yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting. And I couldn't imagine if you put this in cars and then all of a sudden they say, hey, by the way, screens have to be limited to this size, otherwise they're considered a distraction, right, in the vehicle. Like now all of a sudden you get hit with regulations. Could you imagine?
That's bigger than my second monitor.
Yeah, I could see Canada doing something like that too. So
yeah. I guess on the devil's advocate side, if you're in an area with heavy traffic where you're sitting around in your car doing nothing for a long time, pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah. Imagine like there's a massive accident and you have like 2 hours to kill. But
you'd be thinking, this is why I did this. Yeah. Awesome. We are being late, so let's move very quickly to your dedicated section.
Sure. Yes. So I had the lucky chance to do a Rancher masterclass this week, and I got to take a in-depth look at RKE. So for those of you unaware, Rancher has their own Kubernetes version, RKE Rancher Kubernetes engine, and they basically took the open source Kubernetes, they containerized all the components, and they allow you to deploy and configure it through a single YAML file. And we've been talking about declarative security. So I really thought that RKE really embodies that sort of declarative mindset. I have this Rancher Masterclass demo. So I'll drop the link in the chat and you can go check it out on my repository. But basically what I do here is I use Terraform to set up a couple of VMs in GCP. And then I use RKE to bring up the cluster. Now I do all this through like a make file, right? So it's, make running all the Terraform commands. And then after the Terraform commands give me, my inputs back, my IPs back, it basically inserts that into an RKE file that I can then go and install and run. Now, with that being said, RKE out of the box gives you kind of some basics, right? So this is just my template file, username, worker, and you have a bunch of your services here in Kubernetes. So you have etcd, Kube API server, Kube controller, scheduler, kubelet, the different things that you can configure. Now, obviously out of the box, you see nothing's configured here, right? So by default, like most Kubernetes installs, the open source version basically comes wide open. Network policies aren't enabled, ingress isn't enabled, monitoring isn't enabled. And then over the years, we've obviously added this. So some clusters come default with like audit policy enabled, right? Or you automatically have ingress and load balancing enabled in the cluster. You can set all that up through this configuration file, and you can also template it. So I just have a cluster YAML file here, but I have a cluster secure YAML file here. So if I want, let's say, a secure cluster, this changes the default service account. It sets it so that we can't auto mount service tokens, for example. We can set cluster upgrades. What else can we do? We can set private registries. We can talk about authorization. We can set update strategies for our network plugins, right? Like there's so many more configuration aspects that you can do. And what's great about this is it's declarative. So we can set our cluster, put comments as to why we're doing specific things. So the next person that comes along is like, oh, I see what's going on. I see why these choices were made. And you can version these too, right? Like I could set a RKE cluster for the developers that's wide open by default. And then I have a cluster prod. So I think it's great. I think it's simple, useful for people, especially when they're getting started. And the great thing too, obviously, is like this was kind of Rancher's core, let's say, flagship product when they first started coming into the scene in like 2016, 2017, I want to say. And they've built like all their tooling around this, right? So Rancher 2.0 is the management UI to help you organize clusters. And what Rancher realized, obviously, is they're not going to be able to have their own engine, so to speak. So they're just like, we're going to support open source. We're just going to help you manage it. So all of their tools are built around trying to make your life simpler around Kubernetes. So they have things like Longhorn, right, which is going to help you manage storage volumes in Kubernetes. And by just being that like extra plugin to Kubernetes and trying to enable that journey instead of, let's say, kind of pushing Kubernetes in the way that they want to, I find that their product is really, really useful for just out of the box Kubernetes. Get studying, get going. You're not using kubeadm to bootstrap and using tokens and having to deal with that. It's just, here's all the settings, here's what's available to you, and here's all the different configurations that you can set. And like, I like it just because, let's say you have a demo, like I was using the sock shop demo for my masterclass. I can have the wide open and see what happens. And then I set the cluster secure and I see what changes in the application. So for example, if I set network policies and I don't have RBAC configured, nothing runs, right? Which was why we talked about one of the PSP issues. So it's really good for experimenting. If you want to check out more, I'm going to drop the repo for this in the chat. And yeah, let me know what you think about it. If you want some changes. Now, the only thing that I would change if you guys ever want to do something like this, don't put your RKE and Terraform in the same repo. So realistically, and we talked about anti-patterns last week, right? You'd want to have your infrastructure as code. So whether it's like Terraform, Ansible, Chef, whatever you're doing, right? In its own repo. That's bringing up your infrastructure. Then if you're going to configure your cluster, you want that in its own repo. So if you're using RKE or templates or something like that, that's version controlled in its own cluster. Then your application is version controlled in its own cluster, right? The reason for that is when you get declarative, you also have to manage state files too, right? So RKE does come with an RKE state. And the worst thing that you want to do is have your Terraform state and your RKE state and all that stuff in the same folder in the same spot, because you are going to move it or copy it or delete it or do something with it at some point. That's going to screw you over. I'll just say that. Just try to avoid this as much as possible. And I mean, the UI really helps with that. So the UI, if you use the templates in the UI, it'll manage the state for you. It'll basically bring up the clusters. It keeps that there. You don't really have to manage it on the, like in something like Visual Studio Code. But yeah, just make sure that you are managing those state files accordingly. And that is the one drawback that I will say about things like Terraform and RKE. Steve, anything I missed?
Nice. No, that was good. And you did it in surprisingly concise amount of time.
Oh,
I think
great.
you could have done a lot more though, but you did. I think it was great. And no one's asked any questions in the chat, so it must have been good. Either that or they're just like going,
yeah, put them to sleep. It's a Friday. It's a Friday. It's okay.
Yeah. Excellent. That was cool. We're keeping it consistent, always 2 minutes over the half-hour goal. And I think I'm just gonna I'm gonna go with the last item because we bumped it 3 times in a row, and it feels like I feel bad for it now. So I'm going to pop it up. Is that cool? It's gonna be the fastest thing. We'll end on this one, which is, well, yeah, this was your thing, so you're going to keep talking. Voucher. Well, I liked it because it was a fork of Grapheus, but you know more about it because you've already read all this. So
yeah, so it was you're right about the fork. Spotify basically took that and they wanted something where they could know exactly what was running on their cluster, and they used Voucher. So they created a Voucher, and it's binary authorization for all of the image that are running in your cluster. I believe that Google has taken this project and implemented it as part of their binary authorization pipeline. So I think we talked about Recore last week and in Toto and things like that. I think you're going to see, especially with the SIG, what's it called?
New supply chain?
Yeah. We talk about supply chain so much. How do I forget about that word? But yeah, so with the new SIG supply chain, you're going to see this come up a lot in the next year of how do we verify that the image is the same image from Docker build all the way to runtime, and that if that hash or if that that cryptographic hash changes at any point during that life cycle, it's just going to get evicted. It's not going to run. We're going to notify people, hey, this changed. You need to look into why this changed. We're going to build audit policies and audit logging around it, all those changes. And probably our security tools are going to also now be looking for those hashes. So I found it interesting. I thought it was pretty cool that Spotify basically just open sourced this after a little while. It's worth checking out.
It's really interesting because this is a question I don't know. I'm not trying to lead you, but people used to always be looking for things like Notary to sign images instead, but it never really got much traction. Like people talked about it a lot, but didn't really do anything with it. Is this a modern replacement, would you say? Is that what we're going with?
Yeah, it also checks. So Voucher signs the images. So it's part of the chain where like you're basically passing the image hash into it, and then Voucher is actually in the cluster checking to make sure. And I think that the creation and the whole pipeline check process really hadn't been well defined because everybody has a different tool or a different way of implementing it, right? So how do you implement something where it checks in the cluster and at image sign, and we basically have this immutable path all the way through? That's something that's hard to set up, and it really changes based off of where you are. So somebody like Google can implement it a lot easier because they have a set supply chain internally, right, for how images are managed. When you open source something like that, it's really hard for adoption. So I think that you're going to see these projects come out in there's piecemeal fashion, and you're going to see large providers kind of go and be like, okay, well, we have our own internal process all the way through in our own security tooling. We can implement this as part of that tooling. And it keeps people along the straight and narrow path that we provide them, right? That's my 2 cents as to why it wasn't really adopted as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it does have a really interesting. So while you were describing it, I was just kind of going through looking at how, so the binary authorization, uses an admission controller, and there's a link there to the admission controller. You can link that to, and it pulls information about the container from a metadata server, which I've already referenced above, Grapheus. So you've got a pretty slick kind of mechanism in there. It would be interesting to do a demo of this at some point, but yeah, we'll leave that for a future show.
Definitely. Yeah, we're running over. So
yeah. All right. Awesome. Let's kill that off and sign off. Thanks for watching. 7 people.
Sweet.
So
thanks for joining.
We are you probably didn't notice this, Michael. Not that we're competitive, but just before this was the OpenShift Commons, and they had 8 people. So we almost got there. Yeah, we're trying to get above. Not that we're competitive with our new Red Hat overlords, but we're trying to get more people watching. So please tell your friends about this. Put it on your LinkedIn. When we share, you can share too. It would be great to get a larger audience because the chat's where it's at. And it's been really great interacting with the people who did come. And if you're watching in the future, again, please tell all your friends, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, do all those wonderful things.
And ping us. Let us know any WTF topics that you see, any security tools you're interested in if you want us to break it down. I will be updating our Twitch channel with more links. So if you look down at the About Me section, there's kind of like the links to the meetups and some general tools. So I'm going to populate that with some reference links to help you guys in the future. And we're going to be looking to get some other content onto the YouTube channel, just some other talks, people that we think are worthwhile checking out, and we'll reference them there as well. But thanks for joining. We will see you next Friday.